A pleasant day everyone. Welcome to the lecture video of Group 2, which is all about the Philippine taxation. The discussion will begin at knowing what is taxation. Second is the taxation in Spanish Philippines. After that is the taxation under Americans. The fourth topic is the taxation under the Commonwealth period, and the last will be the fiscal policy from 1946 to present. What is taxation? Well, we will going to answer that question along the way. But first, let me present to you the video retrieved from the YouTube channel of European Union. I do not claim that I own this video, and I will be using it for educational purposes only. Have you all thought who pays for our public lighting to give us comfortable visibility at night? Or who pays for the workers who builds bridges and repairs our roads? And have you all ever wondered who pays for the people who maintains public order and keeps us safe? And why we can learn and study in schools and get hospitalized for free? That's where the money comes from. Taxes. Everybody contributes so that everybody can benefit. In simpler terms, taxes fund public services. It is a common contribution among every people in the society, and the tax is scaled according to everyone's ability to pay, and it benefits everybody. But wait, are there exceptions from taxes? Yes. There are situations where we don't pay taxes. If you have your own income, own a house, or buy and sell things, you're obligated to pay tax. Does everybody pay for the same amount of taxes? No. It is determined according to your ability to pay, or in other words, we pay according to what we earn. Another thing to remember is that taxes are only paid in money, and we can't pay for a tax using livestock or any goods. We're now living in 21st century, folks. We can't do that anymore. Do we really need to pay tax? The question we need to ask ourselves is this one: do we enjoy well-equipped hospitals, good roads, and free education? You see, neither this would exist without everyone's contribution. All resources collected from taxes means better public services. Taxes is our main contribution to the public services that we enjoy because we need those to live. Taxes is our civic duty and a requirement of the law. To sum it up, taxes exist because people contribute to build what they needed rather than sit back and not get involved. They choose to stick and support each other, and everybody got benefit out of it. Now that you all know what is taxation and how it works, let us now proceed to the main topic of Philippine taxation. Allow me to let Mr. John Carl Bunsing explain the significant events in the taxation in Spanish Philippines.
Herewith to be discussed is the taxation in the era of Spanish Philippines. Taxes during Spanish period was compulsory. All the Spanish colonies in America and the Philippines were required to pay taxes for two reasons. First, as the recognition of Spain's sovereignty over colonies, meaning the suppression of the Spaniards as they built their colony in the Philippines was somewhat like an audacious superiority towards our land. Second, it is to defray the expenses of pacification, which is the act of forcibly suppressing hostility within the colonies and governance thereafter. Our innocent and powerless Philippines was spearheaded and governed with heavy burden. The audacity of the Spaniards to treat us as their hostile through subjugating our land was ungrateful as a cod. However, this event had given counterparts in the evolution, particularly the taxation in the Philippines. Before I will hand into the main discussion, I will present these terms in order for us to understand smoothly on the things to be discussed later on. These terms correspond relatively to the kinds of taxation. First is the tributo. Tributo was a general tax by the Filipinos to Spain, which amounted to 8 reales. Those who were required to pay the tributo are A. The 18 to 50 years old males individuals. B. the carpenters, the bricklayers, the blacksmiths, the tailors, and the shoemakers. And C, the town workers such as those in road construction and those who's in public in nature. Second is the sanctorum. Sanctorum was a tax in the amount of 3 reales. These were required for the cost of Christianization, including the construction of the churches and the purchase of materials for religious celebrations. Next, we have donativo. This is the tax in the amount of half real for the military campaign of the government against the Muslims. In the later years, however, the amount collected from donativo was almost exclusively used for the Spanish fort in Zamboanga. Next, we have the Caja de Comunidad. This was a tax collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repair of bridges, or the improvement of public buildings. And lastly, we have Servicio Personal. It is also called as Polo y Servicio. This is a system of forced labor which evolved within the framework of the encomienda system, South American colonies by the conquistadores and Catholic priests who accompanied them. It was present in almost all of the Spanish colonial government around the world. Polo y Servicio is the forced labor for only 40 days of men ranging from 16 to 60 years of age who were obligated to give personal services to community projects. Now, I will proceed to the events and things that have happened during the taxation in Spanish Philippines that contributed and helped thrive the evolution of Philippine taxation. First, when the Spaniards came, they started to collect tributos or the tributes. So the purpose of this is to generate resources to finance the maintenance of the islands, such as the salaries of the government officials and the expenses of the clergy. The difficulty faced by the Spaniards in revenue collection through the tribute was the dispersed nature of the settlements, which they solved by introducing the system of reduction by creating pueblos, where Filipinos were gathered and awarded plots of land to till. Later on, the settlements were handled by encomenderos, who received rewards from the Spanish crown for their services. Exempted from payment of tributos were the principales, including the alcaldes or the mayors at this moment, the gobernadores, which are the governors, the cabezas de barangay, which are the barangay captains, the soldiers, the members of the civil guard, the government officials, and the vagrant people or the palaboy-laboy. So the Filipinos have gotten satisfied with the production of agriculture. Later on, half of the tribute was paid in cash and the rest with produce. So definitely, this helped finance the conquest in the Philippines. During the 16th century, there is this what we call the Manila-Acapulco trade, which is commonly known as the galleon trade, where the Spanish government continued trade relations with the neighboring countries of Manila, and Manila itself became the center of commerce to the neighboring countries. So, by means of this event, this improved the economy of the Philippines and reinforced the control of the Spaniards all over the country. However, tax collection was still very poor, and the subsidy from the Spain would be needed through the situado real delivered from the Mexican treasury to the Philippines through the galleons. So this subsidy stopped as Mexico became independent in 1820. So during the galleon trade, forced labor was a character of Spanish colonial taxation and was required from the Filipinos. Through the polo-polo system, male Filipinos were alleged to serve, yet due to a burden with an increase in death rate of citizens, this changed later on, And as the labor and services became lighter and was organized at the municipal level, labor provided was used in public works such as the building of roads and bridges, and some were made to serve the municipal office as their night guards. Next, we have male individuals are required to render polo and servicio in 40 days per annum. They may opt out by paying their absences of 3 pesos per annum, yet imagine how big a peso is equivalent way back then nowadays, for which the collection was usually lost and brought to corruption because it was just collected at the municipal level. In the late 19th century, particularly in 1884, the payment of tribute was put to a stop because of the existence of cedula, which is up until today we are using this way of taxation. This covers each people, not each household, that is being guaranteed by these cedulas. This is usually needed when one was traveling. Indeed, this made the peasants feel much burdened within, unlike the wealthy ones who can afford to pay. This became the major source of income in the government, and also it is the major source of corruption by the Spaniards too. In general, taxation in the Philippines during Spanish colonial period was characterized by a heavy burden place, plus the presence of corruption and other factors that added the pressure of the burden feeling the Filipinos had felt way back. So this discussion was quite lengthy. However, I am hoping that I had brought an informative discussion with regards to the taxation of Spanish Philippines. Now, I will yield control of to discuss the taxation under the Americans.
Good day everyone, so let's proceed now to the taxation under Americans. So after the Spaniard colonizers and other colonizers came here in the Philippines, and these were the Americans. So in the aspect of economy, the Americans aimed to make the economy self-sufficient by running the government with the smallest possible sum of revenue and create a surplus in the budget. So in the year 1898 to 1903, Americans followed the system of taxation, or the taxation system of the previous colonizers who are the Spaniards, but they made some modifications in it. So the military government suspended the contracts for the sale of opium, lottery, and meant charges for coinage of money. Later on, the urbana would be replaced by tax on real estate, and this tax on real estate became known as a land tax, so which was levied on both urban and rural real estates. Collection of land taxes, they encountered some problems, and these include the land titling in the rural area was very disorderly. Another is the appraising of land value was influenced by political and familial factors, and the introduction of a taxation system on agricultural land faced objections from the landed elite. And the last one is taxes evasion was prevalent, especially among the elites. Those were the problems involved with land tax. So it was very unfair to the part of the poor people or those individuals who belong to the lower position of the society, since they need to pay land taxes, while the elite people or the elite individuals who belong to the higher position of the society involved in tax evasion. So those were the problems that was being encountered during the collection of land taxes under Americans. So in response to those problems that is being presented in the previous slide, there was a law that was being passed, and this was the Internal Revenue Law of 1904, and it was passed as a reaction to the problems of collecting land tax. It prescribed 10 major sources of revenue. So the following are the 10 major sources of revenue. So the first one is licensed taxes on firms dealing in alcoholic beverages and tobacco. The next one is excise taxes on alcoholic beverages and tobacco products, taxes on bank and bankers, the document stamp taxes, the cedula, taxes on insurance and insurance companies, taxes on forest products and mining concessions, taxes on business and manufacturing, and the last one is occupational licenses. So again, those were the 10 major sources of revenue under the Internal Revenue Law of 1904. The following are some of the modifications happened during the or after the implementation of that said law. So the first one is the said law went through changes in the new law as the rate was fixed per adult male, which resulted in a great decline in revenues. Next, in the year 1907, there were some provinces that were being authorized to double the fee for the cedula to support the construction and maintenance of the roads. Another is the industrial tax was levied on the business community and became a highly complex system that assigned a certain tax to an industrial commercial activity according to their profitability. And the new act also imposed a percentage tax on sales payable quarterly. So in the year 1913, another act was being passed, and this was the Underwood-Simons Tariff Act, which resulted in the reduction in the revenue of the government as export taxes levied on sugar, tobacco, hemp, and copra were lifted. So to make up for the loss, the Governor General Francis Burton Harrison urged the tax receipts be increased to make up for the loss. So there were some minor changes that were being made to the 1904 Internal Revenue Act, such as the imposition of taxes on mines, petroleum products, and dealers of petroleum products and tobacco. Later on, there were some new sources of taxes that were being introduced. So the first one is in the year 1914, an income tax was introduced. And in the year 1919, an inheritance tax was created. And in the year 1932, a national lottery was established to create more revenue for the government. However, these new creations were not enough to create government revenues.
Next, we have taxation during the Commonwealth period. Under the taxation during the Commonwealth period, new measures and legislation were introduced to make the taxation system appear more equitable. Equitable, which means fair and reasonable in a way that gives an equal treatment, especially the taxation system, to everyone. In 1936, income tax rates were increased, adding a surtax rate or a tax levied on top of another tax on individual net incomes in excess of 10,000. Income tax rates of corporations were also increased. Also in year 1936, the cedula tax was abolished, which appeared to be a progressive move. Cedula is also known as a community tax certificate. It is a document issued to individuals or corporations upon payment of community tax. So how much it is important? It is essential when you are registering for a new business, applying for a job, or filing an income tax returns. We can figure out in the year 1936 really an advantage to people wherein less burden of their lives, wherein they put an end or they get rid of cedula tax that appeared to be a progressive move. In 1940, a residence tax was imposed on every citizen aged 18 years old and on every corporation. If you were asking what is residence tax and how it is important, residence tax is a relevant document to prove your residency, and it is required to confirm which country you are a tax resident of. This may be essential when you have incomes from more than one country, while you have maybe tax resident one of them. Your income may be taxable in both the countries due to the respective domestic laws. We can say in the year 1940 that it was hard for them to forcefully pay the residence tax that much higher, especially for those people who had less income by means of their living. 1939, the Commonwealth government drafted or selecting for the purpose of the National Internal Revenue Code, or the body of law that codifies all federal tax laws, introducing major changes in the new tax system as follows. First, the normal tax of 3% and the surtax on income was replaced by a single tax at a progressive rate. Second, personal exemptions were reduced. Third, corporation income tax was slightly increased by introducing taxes on inherited estates or gifts donated in the name of dead persons. Fourth, the cumulative sales tax was replaced by a single turnover tax of 10% on luxuries. Fifth, taxes on liquors, cigarettes, forestry products, and mining were increased. And last, dividends were made taxable. So those are the following major changes in the new tax system under the National Internal Revenue Code in year 1930. Another important summary, the introduced tax structure was an improvement of the earlier system introduced by the Americans but still remained inequitable, wherein the lower class still felt the bulk of burden of taxation, while the upper class, the landed elite of the people in political positions, were able to maneuver the situation that would benefit them more. So the agriculture sector was still taxed low to promote growth, but there was no incentive for industrial investment to take root. Then, finally, a common character of taxation during the American occupation in the Philippines was not used to diversify the economy or direct economic development, as some sectors still carried the disproportionate share of the tax burden. Next, as World War II reached the Philippines shores, economic activity was put to a stop and the Philippines bowed to a new set of administrators, the Japanese, wherein the Japanese military administration and the Philippines during the World War II immediately continued the system of tax collection introduced during the Commonwealth, but exempted the articles belonging to the Japanese armed forces. Foreign trade fell and the main source of taxation came from the amusements, manufacturers, professions, and business licenses. As the war raged, tax collection was a difficult task, and additional incomes of the government were derived from sales of the national sweepstakes and sale of government. Then the expenditure of the Japanese military government grew greatly, and they issued military notes in order to cover the cost of the war.
After we've heard about the discussion on Philippine taxation evolution starting from Spanish, American, and Commonwealth period, let's now proceed to fiscal policy from 1946 to present. But first of all, what is fiscal policy? According to International Monetary Fund, fiscal policy is the use of government and spending its taxation to influence the economy. The impact of the war of the Philippine economy was effectively disparate, as Manila, the capital, was razed to the ground, while the rest of the Philippines was relatively untouched. But the highly agriculture-based economy was disrupted. The United States may have declared the Philippines independent, but as the country needed rehabilitation funds from the United States, the dependency of the Philippines to the Americans was an opportunity to be taken advantage of by the former colonial administrators. The economic situation was so problematic that by 1949, there was a severe lack of funds in many aspects of governance, such as the military and education sectors. No efforts were made to improve tax collection, and the United States advised the adoption of direct taxation. Direct taxation refers to the tax paid directly by an individual to government, and indirect taxation refers to tax that are collected. The administration of President Manuel Rojas declined the proposal because it did not want to alienate its allies in Congress. Although Rojas was successful in getting rehabilitation funds from US after independence, he was forced to concede military bases, trade restrictions for Philippine citizens, and special privileges for US property owners and investors. In his administration, it was struck by graft and corruption. Moreover, the abuses of the provincial military police contributed to the rise of the left-wing Huk Balahap or Huk movement in the countryside. The impetus for economic growth came during the time of President Elpidio Quirino through the implementation of import and exchange controls that lead to import substitution development. This policy allowed for the expansion of a viable manufacturing sector that reduce economic dependence on imports. New tax measures were also passed, which include higher corporate tax rates that increased government revenues. Tax revenue in 1953 increased twofold compared to 1948, where it is a year when Quirino first assumed presidency. President Elpidio Quirino marked its place in his contribution by the Philippine tax system by raising direct taxes and reducing the indirect taxes. While the succeeding presidencies of Magsaysay, Garcia, and Macapagal promised to study the tax structure and policy of the country through the creation of a tax commission in 1959 by the means of Republic Act No. 2211 to make way for a more robust and efficient tax collection scheme. Post-war fiscal policy remained regressive, characterized by the overburdening of the lowest classes, while the landed elite who held business interests were in Congress to ensure that taxes would not be levied to them who belonged to the higher classes of society. The period of the post-war republic also saw a rise in corruption. From 1959 to 1968, Congress did not pass any tax legislation despite the important changes in the economy, and the vested interest of the Filipino businessmen in Congress would manifest in many instances, such as the rejection of tax revenues, and the Omnibus Tax Law of 1969 did not increase the tax ratio of income tax to general tax revenue. Collection of taxes remained poor, tax structure was still problematic, and much of public funds were lost to corruption, which left the government incapable of funding projects geared toward development. Under the Marcos authoritarian regime, the tax system remained regressive. During the latter part of Marcos' years, from 1981 to 1985, the tax system was still heavily dependent to indirect taxes, which made up of 70% of total tax collection. The tax system also remained unresponsive. Taxes grew at an average annual rate of 15% and generated a low tax yield. Tax effort, defined as the ratio between the share of the actual tax collection in gross taxable capacity, was at low 10.7%. As Corazon Aquino took the helm of the government after the EDSA revolution, she reformed tax system through the 1986 Tax Reform Program. Its aim is to improve the responsiveness of the tax system, promote equity by ensuring that similarly situated individuals and firms bear the same tax burden, promote growth by withdrawing or modifying taxes that reduce incentives to work or produce, and also to improve tax administration by simplifying the tax system and promoting tax compliance. Major reform in the tax system introduced under the term of Aquino was the introduction of the value-added tax, or the VAT, with the following features. First, uniform rate of 10% on sale of domestic and imported goods and services and 0% on exports and foreign currency denominated sales. Second, 10% in lieu of varied rates applicable to fixed taxes with 16 nominal rates. So there are a lot of taxes that is being considered here in the second category feature. Third, 2% tax on entities with annual sales or receipts of less than 5,200,000. Fourth one, the adoption of tax credit method of calculating tax by subtracting tax on inputs from tax on gross sales. The fifth one, exemption of the sale of basic commodities such as agriculture and marine food products in their original state, price-regulated petroleum products and fertilizers. And lastly, additional 20% tax on non-essential articles such as jewelry, perfumes, toilet waters, yate, and other vessels for pleasures and sports. The VAT law was signed in 1986 and put to effect in 1988. While it was a reliable source of revenue for the government, the new tax laws would induce its reliability as legislated exemptions grew. Along with tax reform came the administrative reforms, such as the restructuring of the Department of Finance and its attached agency or the Bureau of Internal Revenue, that is the BIR, through the Executive Order 127, and by that, tax collection and tax audits were intensified. Computerization was introduced and corruption was relatively reduced, which improved the trust in the BIR on general. As a result of the tax reform of the Aquino administration, both tax and revenue effort rose, increasing from 10.7% in 1985 to 15.4% in 1992. Greater political stability during the administration of President Ramos in 1992 allowed for continued economic growth. The Ramos administration ventured into its own tax reform program in 1997 through the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program, which was implemented to first, make the tax system broad-based, simple, and with reasonable tax rates. Second, minimize tax avoidance allowed by existing flaws and loopholes in the system. Third, encourage payments by increasing tax exemption levels, lowering the highest tax rates and simplifying procedure. And fourth, rationalize the grant of tax incentives, which was estimated to be worth 531.7 billion pesos in 1994. The VAT base was also broadened in 1997 to include services through Republic Act No. 7716. The featured of the improved VAT laws were as follows. First, restore the VAT exemptions for all cooperatives. That includes agricultural, electric, credit or multipurpose and others, provided that the share capital of each member does not exceed 5,145 pesos. Second, expanded the coverage of the term simple processes by including broiling and roasting, effectively narrowing the tax base for food products. Third, expanded the coverage of the term original state by including molasses. Fourth, exemptions from the VAT towards economic activities are the following. First is the importation of meat or importation of coal and natural gas in whatever form or state. Then we have the education services rendered by private educational institutions duly accredited by the Commission on Higher Education or CHED. Then house and lot and other residential dwellings valued at 51 million and below, subject to adjustment using the Consumer Price Index or the CPI. Lease of residential units with monthly rental per unit of not more than 58,000, subject to adjustment using CPI. And lastly, the sale, importation, printing, or publication of books and any newspapers. So those are the exemptions of the VAT that are included in our economic activities. The succeeding term of President Joseph Estrada in 1998 was too short to constitute any change in the tax system. Then Vice President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was swept to power through another EDSA revolution. As president, she undertook increased government spending without adjusting tax collections. This resulted in large deficits from 2002 to 2004. The government had to look for additional sources of revenue, and in 2005, the expanded value-added tax or the EVAT was signed into law as Republic Act 9336. This expanded the VAT base, subjecting the VAT energy products such as coal and petroleum products and electricity generation that includes transmission and distribution. Select professional services were also taxed. In February 2006, the VAT tax rate was also increased from 10% to 12%. As President Benigno Aquino III succeeded President Arroyo in 2010, he promised that no new taxes would be imposed and additional revenue would have to come from adjusting existing taxes. The administration ventured into the adjustment of excise tax on liquor and cigarettes or the sin tax reform, motivations for which was primarily fiscal, public health, and social order related considerations. Republic Act No. 10351 was passed, and government revenues from alcohol in 2015 made up 1.1% of the gross domestic product, and the improvement of tax collection resulted in the Philippines receiving a credit rating upgrade into investment grade status. The sin tax reform was an exemplar on how tax reform could impact social services, as it allowed for the increase of the Department of Health budget triple in 2015, an increase from 55.2 million in 2012 to 525.4 million in 2015. And lastly, the administration of the new President Rodrigo Duterte promised tax reform, particularly income taxes, as it vowed to lower income tax rates shouldered by working Filipinos. It is hoped that reforms in the country's tax policy will result in the much desired economic development that will be felt even by the lower classes in society. And that's all with regards to the fiscal policy from 1946 to present. Thank you so much for listening.
And that will be the end of our lecture discussion. We hope that you all have learned something about the history of our Philippine taxation from the Spanish period to the present. Thank you and God bless.